So my name's Kirsten Abernethy and I'm the Executive Officer of Women in Seafood Australasia, or WISA. So on behalf of myself and WISA, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of these lands and waters, the Wadawurrung people. I acknowledge and respect their continuing connections to their lands and waters, their stories, traditions and living cultures, and the contribution to the life and spirit of our community. I pay respect to past, present and future elders and extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So I'm very excited to welcome and introduce our guest speaker today, Heather Brayford. But just before I do, I just wanted to let you know about the other webinars that we still have coming up. We still have 3 more to go after today. So on Friday, we've got Jo Marshall, who's been spearheading the Stay Afloat program. So that's a program to improve mental health in the seafood industry from the grassroots up. And this is a program of work that was brought to industry attention through WISA starting this conversation, getting the research done, and now the industry's got this really great program to make change. So we're going to hear all about it on Friday. Then next Tuesday, we've got Simone Heyman, 3rd generation tuna farmer in Port Lincoln. So Simone's story is one which will demonstrate what can be done when a new generation shake the system, collaborate and innovate. She's going to talk about their journey developing their seafood business, Kin. And then next Thursday, we have Sky Cherry. So we had to reschedule Sky from last week because of a family health emergency, but all is good. And she's going to be delivering her webinar on Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern States time. So Sky's a lawyer and Australia's top expert in workplace harassment in rural industries, having worked in farming, mining and forestry and a range of sort of other rural workplaces. So her webinar is extremely relevant to what WISA have found out in our recent survey, which revealed that 1 in 5 women work in places where there's sexual harassment. So there's a short film to watch before her webinar on Thursday. But on behalf of WISA, and noting that we do have several of our WISA board here, including Heidi Mummy, the chair of the WISA board, I'd just like to thank all of the women for giving their time to be part of this webinar series. And I really encourage you all to get online at Eventbrite and book in for the next ones. So today we've got Heather Brayford. And we have had an absolutely huge amount of interest in Heather's webinar. So her webinar almost sold out. And Heather has often been the only woman in the room, and certainly the most senior woman in fisheries within WA's government. Heather has served the community as part of the public sector for more than 35 years. Heather joined WA's Department of Fisheries in '86, and she's now responsible for 800 staff across the state as Deputy Director General, Sustainability and Biosecurity with the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. So she works across fisheries, biosecurity, agriculture and animal welfare. Heather was awarded a Public Service Medal in the 2020 Queen's Birthday Honours List for exemplary leadership. So we are so lucky to have Heather speaking to us today. She's going to be talking about her leadership journey and what she's learned along the way. And afterwards, we'll have the opportunity to have questions and answers. So thank you, Heather, and welcome.
Thanks, Kirsten. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to try and share my screen. That's interesting. Just bear with me. It's different to the one I had before for some reason. I might just get a little bit of help here.
That's okay, Heather. That happened to me too when I did mine.
It's a bit of a strange setup here, so I'm just going to get one of my fantastic people to wander in right now, who you will see, because the screen is quite different to what it was during that rehearsal that I did with Kirsten earlier.
It's always the way.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that's happened. This is Mari, everybody, and we all need fabulous people in our lives, and she's one of my fabulous people. So for some reason, it just hasn't come up, but we will. And we did check this a number of times.
We just, yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
Classic technology.
It's technology, it's fine.
Builds the suspense, Heather.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right. There you go. That's why you need really good people around you. That's a great example.
So
so I can't. Can you see the screen now, Kirsten?
No, we can't. Not yet.
Oh, hang on. Can't see it? Oh, I can. I'll just get some further help. That's a real bugger.
It's all right. Did you want me to share? I could share my.
Just hang on 1 minute if you don't mind.
Yep, sure.
That's not working. I can see it perfectly on my screen. We'll just have another crack. Just bear with me. This was my biggest stress about this talk, was the technology, and my biggest stress has come to fruition. Aha, we should be right now.
It looks like it's happening now. Yeah.
No.
Yep, you're right, Heather.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, can you see that screen now, Kirsten?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, all right, we're away. So thank you very much, and thanks for bearing with me there. So thank you for having me to speak today, and a really big congratulations to WISER for your webinar series in honour of International Women's Day. I'm coming to you from Wajat Noongar Budja today, and I pay my respects to our nation's first people and to elders past, present and emerging. So today I'm going to share my journey with the West Australian Department of Fisheries, and more recently with the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. I'm also going to touch on some experiences in the Northern Territory and highlight a couple of examples to really show the diversity of work that we do across fisheries in particular. I was lucky enough to join Kylie's webinar last week, which I thought was fantastic. And I should echo her thoughts that talking about yourself is one of the hardest things to do. Kylie did do a great job, so hopefully I can match her. And I also realised how hard it is to pack 35 odd years into about half an hour. So here goes. So a little bit about me. I was born in a small farming community of Calaburn, which is about 200 kilometres east of Perth, and it's a very long way from the ocean. I did a quick Google search for today, and a few notable people were born in Cala, as we affectionately call it. For those AFL fans out there, Nicky Winmar and Byron Pickett were born in Calaburn. A guy called Ray Hartley, who was apparently a world-class pianist and composer, was born in Cala. And also some of you might have heard of Peter Walsh. He was an Australian senator and a minister in the Hawke government. But that's really about it for the little wheat belt town of Calaburn. We left Calaburn when I was 3, and for much of my childhood, I lived and attended school in the semi-rural suburb of Armidale, which is about 30 kilometres southeast of Perth. It's a pretty low socio-economic suburb for those who know it here in Perth. It has been for a long time and continues to be so. I was brought up around animals, mainly horses, with lots of lamb and mutton on the dining room table, which I'm not a fan of. And I think the closest we ever got to seafood was probably my mum eating sardines on toast. Again, I'm not a fan. Or some salmon in patties. So fishing and the seafood industry was very far from my world, and certainly very far from my thinking. So I had some great times in my childhood, but my teen years were at times quite difficult, with just mum and I most of the time, and mum really struggling to make ends meet. I'm the youngest of 3 by far. I have a brother and a sister, but by then they were out and about. So it was really just mum and I at home trying to get through. Suffice to say, I focused on school, which is really important to me, and on sport, which I love. Many people know that I love my sport. I love my hockey, love my cricket, love my footy. So sport was really important to me growing up. My parents had both left school really early and coming from sort of farming backgrounds, as had my brother and my sister. In fact, no one had really gone past year 10, and certainly no one had gone to years 11 and 12. And university was not really even in anyone's thinking. And I'd also not travelled outside of WA. In fact, I probably hadn't gone further than about 300 kilometres from home. I think I'd gone maybe Perth to Busselton for those that know WA. So my life experience was pretty narrow at that time. And I think that time growing up has really helped me define my values as a person and how I approach things. So to me, it's been about making positive choices and taking personal responsibility even when things have been difficult. And my choice was to focus on school and to work hard and to do my best. Really not having a sense of entitlement or expectation, and as a public servant, I think that's pretty important. And I think also that everybody has their own story, and we really need to show empathy and respect. And at times we need to stand in others' shoes and really understand what might be driving their behaviours and their actions. So after leaving school, I went to university, which was a pretty big deal for everybody. Again, no one had really done that before. And I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in a course at Murdoch University, which was called Population and World Resources. So that course sounds a little strange probably to people, and it certainly wasn't mainstream. It reflected, however, the expanding field of environmental science, and it supplemented that with humanities subjects, so things like economics, ethics, and political science. So in essence, it was really a degree in sustainable development. In fact, I think I Googled this again. I think the course is now called Sustainable Development. So from population and world resources to sustainable development. I really don't know what piqued my interest in that particular course, as I had no idea what I wanted to do, aside from being a phys ed teacher. So that was my only other thing that I really thought I wanted to do. But little did I know then how important that degree and how relevant that degree would be to my career. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a journey through fisheries, and there's a few old documents there. I wish I looked as young as I do in that picture there. But towards the end of my degree, I applied for a graduate role in both the Commonwealth and the state public services with really no expectation. I was fortunate enough to be offered what was called a trainee graduate assistant position with the WA Public Service, and I was literally allocated to the Department of Fisheries, and that was as a level 1, which was the lowest entry point, and that was in January 1986, over 35 years ago. And I actually have a few of the old documents, the old State of the Fisheries document in 1986, and we still publish State of the Fisheries every year, so it's something that I've kept and it's come in useful for today. In those days, the department's activities were really concentrated on commercial fishing, mainly rock lobster. And I think there's a couple of rock lobster people online today, or as we used to call it, the cray fishery. There was also work focused on prawns, on pearling, and what we used to call wet fishing. So it was largely commercial line fishers, catching snapper and so forth. Recreational fishing really wasn't a major focus, and aquaculture was very new, although people were seeing it as important to be able to supplement wild capture fisheries. I vividly remember my first few weeks in the department. It was my first ever job, although I did have another job for 2 nights washing dishes at a Chinese restaurant in Armidale, which didn't last very long. I had no knowledge of anything really to do with fisheries except from eating fish and chips. The public service was an immense mystery to me, and I found the whole thing really overwhelming. So my boss at the time was a guy called Peter Rogers, and Peter, I expect, is known to some of you online. Peter was pretty tough, and after the first few weeks, I had planned to leave the department and to enrol in a graduate diploma in education and become a phys ed teacher. But it was about that time that Peter took me to Geraldton, north of Perth, for a meeting with the Brollis Island scallop fishermen. And that was my first ever plane trip. And we ended up in a conversation about how I was going. And I think Peter knew I was struggling a bit. And he essentially said to me that I could either sink or I could swim. So I'm a highly competitive person, as many close to me know. So that really brought out my competitive spirit. So I hung in there and I never really looked back. I worked with Peter for much of my career at Fisheries. He was a fabulous mentor and hugely influential to me. He provided fantastic opportunities and really had great faith in me personally. He was also one of the smartest people that I know. and a real thought leader in fisheries nationally. And there are still times today when faced with a problem or an issue, I sit at my desk and I ask myself, what would Peter do? But things were quickly changing in fisheries. So commercial fishing effort was increasing and really could not be left unchecked. In response, the department went through a process with industry over time of introducing what we called limited entry fisheries for long-term sustainability. And there's a photo there of a discussion paper in 1988. It was from a thing called the Mandurah Working Group, which may mean something to some online. And it really set the pathway forward for limiting entry and managing entry into fisheries of Western Australia's coastline. It was a very significant piece of work. It was off the back of major species such as lobster and prawns already being under formal management. And it was pretty tough. It was really tough for industry. Many fishers were faced with having to leave the industry if they didn't meet the criteria for entry, or not being able to operate in some of the fisheries they had historically operated in. So it was really the beginning, I guess, of the real longer term formal approach to management of fisheries in Western Australia. The other thing that was happening is recreational fishing was really on the move, and rec fishers were wanting a bigger piece of the pie. Management strategies were being developed, things like bag limits, boat limits, possession limits, and this created the inevitable resource sharing issues and a level of conflict between the commercial and the recreational sectors. And unfortunately, we still see many of those issues really around Australia today as we seek to share our fisheries, our very valuable fisheries resources. The other thing is that aquaculture was gaining momentum, and there was significant investment in research and development to create economic opportunities and to take the pressure off wild stocks, while also ensuring that our activities were sound environmentally. That also impacted on the sharing of resources, because there was another player that was seeking access to land and to coastal sites. Something very dear to my heart, the pearling industry, that was also growing and was to become the state's second most valuable sector after lobster. And I love the photo there on the screen, which shows many strands of pearls produced from pearl oysters farmed in the pristine waters of Western Australia and Northern Australia. And I expect there's a fair bit of money just sitting in that photo. There was also a growing focus from the conservation movement on fisheries and aquaculture, including, for example, the creation of marine protected areas, minimising fishing impacts on endangered and threatened species, reducing bycatch, minimising the impacts of aquaculture, and just a general concern about the health of the ocean and the marine environment. And really importantly, we're also seeing the rights and the aspirations of our First Nations people coming to the fore. So you'll all recall the Mabo decision handed down in 1992, with the Commonwealth Native Title Act following in 1993. And then we had the landmark Blue Mud Bay decision in the Northern Territory in 2008, which some of you may not be familiar with. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And this quite rightly required the inclusion and consideration of customary fishing and the greater involvement of the Aboriginal community in fisheries management. So I was really fortunate and privileged to be part of that fisheries management journey, not just in Western Australia, but as it unfolded across Australia. And fisheries management as a practice or as a profession, as it's more recognised now, was really just emerging, with most management decisions being made or coming through research. So as I said, through Peter, I was really thrown in the deep end, and I was given great autonomy and responsibility, including being able to, liaise and visit fishers all around the state. I would meet, fishers' families, work with colleagues around Australia. I was on a number of national committees, both fisheries and aquaculture, and essentially have the chance to be involved in and really become passionate about the industry and its future. So I never really left the department, aside from a small 3-year stint on secondment in the Northern Territory, which I'll come to in a moment. And I made my way through the ranks on what I would describe as a long and steady journey. There are many highlights, as I've described, but there were also many setbacks. So I missed out on promotional opportunities. I spent many hours taking minutes at meetings, at industry meetings, as the only female, or the female in the room was really expected to do at that time. I organised lots of tea and lots of coffee for those meetings. So, you know, it wasn't easy, but it was also a very important part of my journey, part of the process. And I was also told that if I wanted to progress in the department, I really needed to do some more study. So I completed a diploma in business, and then some years later, when I was working full-time and when my second son was 1, I completed my MBA, which I was pretty stoked with. So even through some of the difficult periods in the department, I've always stuck to my core values of honesty, respect and empathy, and always wanting to do my best. I was also an active learner, and I welcomed feedback, even if it was critical at times, and learning from those around me was really important to me. I also learned about resilience in an ever-changing world and the critical importance of meaningful relationships. And we have a bit of a saying here in Western Australia that fisheries management is really nothing about the fish, it's all about the people. So the ability to build and maintain relationships, to communicate, to negotiate and influence to achieve positive outcomes is really important and can't be understated. So a really significant time for me and a real turning point in my career came in 2007 when I was offered the role of Director of Fisheries in the Northern Territory. I love that barra photo there. I was the only one that caught a barra Monday on that day. I wouldn't describe myself as a risk taker, so heading to Darwin with my young family, so my 1-year-old, a 5-year-old and my husband, was a pretty big decision for me. As some of you know, fisheries is very high profile in the Northern Territory, particularly recreational fishing. And although it's only a small group, taking on the director's role presented quite a few challenges and also opportunities. So there's a real need for change within fisheries to re-energise our research and management teams. Fisheries compliance was undertaken separately by the Northern Territory Police, so we didn't have the compliance arm in the department. So that created its own challenges. And there's also a really important need to build stronger and more meaningful relationships with stakeholders in both the commercial and recreational sector. We needed to enhance our consultation processes, so put in place a process to revamp our management advisory committees, and ultimately to provide government with really good advice on long-term sustainable management of fisheries in the Territory. Interestingly, I spent an awful lot of time working on meeting government's aspirations to build new boat ramps and toilet blocks in popular recreational fishing areas. That might sound pretty easy, but when you have a very high tidal range and huge flooding during the wet season, having all access ramps and toilets can be quite tricky. And I didn't really expect to be working with engineers and builders on toilets and boat ramps, but that's what government wanted me to do. So that taught me the need to be adaptable and responsive, and really highlighted the role that public servants play in serving the government of the day. Just want to have a chat about Blue Mud Bay. So I talked about Blue Mud Bay briefly earlier. So Blue Mud Bay, apart from toilets and boat ramps, Blue Mud Bay was the other unexpected thing that I had to deal with when I really just first arrived at the Territory, and it was an extraordinarily important matter. So Blue Mud Bay is a land rights case. It's not a native title case, so it wasn't in this context. It's a land rights case. Blue Mud Bay is a large, shallow bay on the eastern coast of Arnhem Land. The Yolngu people are the traditional owners. So the Blue Mud Bay case for the full federal court at the time related to Aboriginal land rights in the territory, and the court found that land in the intertidal zone, which can be very large with that large tidal range, could be claimed and recognised as Aboriginal land. This applied to a large portion of the territory coastline. I think it was about 80%, thousands of kilometres. And hence it directly impacted recreational fishers and also commercial fishers who had previously been able to access those lands or waters unencumbered, but as a result of the Blue Mud Bay case would now need permission to enter by way of a permit or a licence. And on the slide there you can see a copy of my licence, which I took out, that allowed myself, my husband and my kids to enter and remain on Aboriginal land for the purposes of amateur fishing. The case was very far-reaching, and the Northern Territory government, not surprisingly, lodged an appeal with the High Court. And as Director of Fisheries, I think I was actually a respondent on the court papers, I was able to attend that High Court hearing alongside the traditional owners, which was an immense privilege for me. For those of you who know Justice Kirby, who was a very famous High Court judge, it was also his last hearing, so it was a very special time to be in the High Court. While the case had a number of elements, the practical outcome was that the High Court confirmed that entry into waters overlying Aboriginal land for the purposes of fishing required permission from the relevant land trust and the three relevant land trusts. So for recreational fishers in particular in the Territory, the need to have a licence or permit to allow for access was really an anathema. And you can see the front page there of the Northern Territory News. Get ready for fishing licences. For first time ever, rec fishers need permits. So in the Territory, it was a pretty big deal. But for me, and most importantly, the Blue Mud Bay matter developed a whole new set of skills in working with the traditional owners and really seeking to negotiate positive outcomes for all, including working with a small group of government officers to develop and negotiate a fisheries management framework, which would incorporate greater involvement of Aboriginal people in fisheries, quite rightly, but also providing for ongoing access to Aboriginal lands to enable recreational fishing and commercial fishing. We also had the great opportunity to build relationships directly with the TOs, including a fact-finding delegation to New Zealand, where we learnt about Maori involvement in fisheries, which is another whole seminar in itself, and the Treaty of Waitangi. And while negotiations continued well past my time in the Territory, Blue Mud Bay was a really special opportunity to be involved in one of the most important Aboriginal land rights cases in Australia. And I really encourage those interested to read a bit about the case online. So I was pretty happy with what was achieved in my time in the Territory. It culminated in me being selected as a finalist in the NT Telstra Business Women's Awards, which enabled me to meet a whole group of really inspiring and aspiring women. And while it was only for a really short period of time, 3 years, the move to Darwin was really the change that I needed and took me out of my comfort zone back at fisheries and brought a whole new set of experiences and learning. So back to the future. So I came back to WA in late 2009 to take up the role of Deputy Director General with the WA Department of Fisheries. And after 5 years in that role, I was appointed as Acting Director General in September 2014, and then Director General in 2015. And I was really humbled to be given that immense responsibility and opportunity. And during that period, we implemented a really significant reform agenda in WA Fisheries. In fact, it was probably, aside from the work back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was probably the next biggest reform agenda. So we moved the state's iconic rock lobster fishery to quota management. For those of you who know a little bit about fisheries and ITQs and fisheries management, that was a very big deal. It was pretty controversial at the time, but it's been a great success story, providing fishers and quota holders with greater flexibility and increased returns, whilst ensuring the rock lobster resource remains healthy, and that's really what it's all about. We also laid the foundations for new modern legislation. This has been a really long journey, and we're now at the point of implementation. And the legislation has as its fundamentals what I call the 3 Rs. So it takes a risk-based approach, given the focus on sustainability. It takes a resource-based approach across the entire resource set, not just the sectors that access it. And it also takes a rights-based approach. And we've heard about in other webinars the importance of rights-based approaches for industry. We implemented new funding and consultation arrangements with our sectors. And really excitingly, we embarked on a program of Marine Stewardship Council certification of our fisheries. This program commenced 10 years ago in 2012 off the back of the lobster fishery being the first in the world to be MSC certified in the year 2000. And we now have 11 fisheries certified, which equates to over 90% of the value of our commercial fisheries. This is a great achievement, and we're all really proud in Western Australia of that. And our 10-year commitment was actually recognised just last Friday at the MSC Fish Forever campaign launch. And I think I've seen some couple of MSC people on the hookup today. Government funded that program to about $14 to $15 million. It is world leading and has provided the opportunity for all WA fisheries to be MSC certified, or to identify where we need to make improvements to meet the very high sustainability bar set by the MSC. I've helped lead that program with industry here in WA, and I'm also a member of the MSC Stakeholder Council, which provides a really special opportunity to work with industry members, with leading retail organisations and conservation groups from all over the world to achieve the MSC's aim of protecting our oceans and safeguarding seafood supplies for the future. This was also a period when I spent a fabulous 6 years as a director of the Fisheries Research and Development Corporation, and I couldn't get a photo, but I did manage to pull up a copy of one of the FRDC's annual reports. And that gave me a great opportunity to help shape really the national fisheries R&D agenda, but it brought great experience for me in the role and responsibilities of a board director, and really built my experience around exposure to corporate governance. I also developed a whole new set of relationships, and I learned from some of the best in the business. So industry leaders like Stuart Ritchie and Brett McCullum, government and former government leaders such as Richard Stevens, who was instrumental in getting me to go to Darwin, Peter Neville and Renata Brooks. And I was also warmly welcomed into the FRDC family by Patrick and the team. And I continue to look back on that board time as extremely rewarding, lots of fun, and highly value the friendships forged. So for me, as you can see, fisheries was a huge part of my life. And I often reflect to others that most of my most important moments in my life have occurred whilst at fisheries. And I've been able to share those with colleagues, and often with industry members as well. So things like significant birthdays, getting engaged, getting married, having my first son, having my second son, and all the other things along the way. So fisheries has always been part of that. Now, machinery of government changes followed our state election in 2017, and that saw 3 departments merged. So the Department of Fisheries was merged with the Departments of Agriculture and Food and Regional Development, and the new Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. So fisheries had been a standalone department since 1985 and was now part of a much bigger department with a much bigger remit. it really was a little fish in a big pond. So that merger resulted in the loss of my role as the DG of fisheries, as if you do the maths, 3 DGs don't really go into one. So it was a pretty tough time for me. And I think in the weeks and months to follow, there was a mix of sadness and there was a bit of anger and a few tears. But the support that I received from those in the fisheries family, both inside and outside the department, was very humbling and really helped me to pick myself up, dust myself off and get back on the horse, as they say. And ultimately, that gave way to a sense of great opportunity, and I was privileged to be offered a senior position in the new department as the Deputy Director General of Sustainability and Biosecurity, which is the role that I have now. In that role, I lead a team of about 800 staff right across the state. It is close to half the department, and we work on a number of key things. So certainly fisheries is part of that remit, which is fabulous for me because, as you can hear, I'm pretty passionate about fisheries, and also management of land and soils to support agriculture and our pastoral industries through things like salinity management, improving soil health, and regenerative agriculture. Also have a role in aquaculture development, which continues to be of high importance to government and to industry. And then we have this thing called biosecurity, which is a very big gig, as many of you probably know, and that's through preventing, managing, and responding to pests and diseases that not only can affect our domestic and our export trade, but also affect our environment and our lifestyle. And unfortunately, there's been a growing trend of increased biosecurity risks from pests and diseases across Australia, which do have significant impacts. And if you're reading the news, you would have read about Japanese encephalitis, for example, which is a mosquito-borne disease that can affect pigs and horses and, of course, humans. So, you know, there's a team that works in my area is working closely with national colleagues in the health department on managing that Japanese encephalitis outbreak. And we've had extensive programs to eradicate things like Queensland fruit fly, red imported fire ants, capra beetle, brown marmorated stink bug. There's a whole number of pesky little things that can cause immense damage. So that's been a huge learning curve for me. And also have responsibility for animal welfare regulation to meet community expectations and industry needs. That's an area that engenders significant community debate. If you think about, things like, horse racing and the live export trade. So that role throws up opportunities and challenges every day. I'm learning about sheep, cattle, wild dogs, fruit fly, feral cats, soil health, carbon farming, and so it goes on. And I do just love the newspaper article you can see in the top left of the slide, which shows how we've taken some of our learnings in fisheries. In this particular case, it's in compliance into the world of agriculture and animal welfare. I'm just going to have a quick chat about sharks in Western Australia. It's unfortunate to have to talk about it, but there have been a number of shark attacks in WA, and it's quite a topical issue. So DPID and the Department of Fisheries is responsible for shark mitigation in Western Australia, and I've been heavily involved in that space for a number of years. I've seen government policy and community sentiment shift over time. I've had a key leadership role, which has seen the delivery of arguably the world's most comprehensive shark program. Very complex, highly visible and intense community interest, as you can see from some of the shots on screen there. As Director General of Fisheries, the government policy at the time was to set gear to take a shark or sharks in the event of a serious attack or an imminent threat of attack. And my role as Director General was to make the decision in terms of setting gear. And I think that's probably been one of the hardest things that I've done and had to deal with, given the divided community opinion at the time and the potential consequences of those decisions. So for me, this was a time to be calm, at least on the outside, to work with the expert team around me and to be confident in decision making. Under current government policy, the circumstances to set gear are much more limited, and our focus is really on public safety as the overarching priority. And we have a range of public safety measures now, as you can see from some of those some of those images. One of my favourite images is the fisheries boat on patrol at a recent world surfing event in WA. I think it's a fantastic image. And there's a shot there of our research team tagging a very big white shark, which can be very risky and very dangerous business. So I'm really proud of how the department staff have managed the shark program over many years with absolute professionalism and commitment, even in what has been some very, very difficult times. Just a quick change of tack, and I'm conscious of time. I'm often asked about my career as a female. So when I first joined the department in 1986, there were no female fisheries officers in the compliance area and no appetite to employ any. And some of the reasons for that were because, and I can quote these because I remember them very well, it would upset the wives of the current fisheries officers, and because we didn't have any female toilets on our patrol vessels. There were also no female research scientists, and similarly no real appetite to employ any. Again, there were no female toilets on our research vessels, so how could we have female research scientists? And I remember very well arguing hard as a member of a recruitment panel, I think I was the token female at the time, to ensure that a female scientist was appointed to a role, not because she was female, but because she was clearly the best candidate for the job. And I won that debate, and I was very proud of that. And we also had no females in senior or even in middle management roles. So as Kirsten said, much of my early career was spent as the only female in the room, working within a male-dominated industry and a male-dominated department. And over the years, I built the trust and support of those I worked with, I think by being honest, hardworking, and basically showing that I wanted to do my best and be the best that I could, and also importing that on others. So women continue to be underrepresented in the workplace, particularly at senior levels, and I think we're all aware of the benefits of gender equality. Women do bring a different perspective with different skills in negotiation and communication and relationship buildings. And we've certainly seen that in the fishery space, and we're seeing a lot more females in the department across government, but I still think there's a long way to go there. So just a few reflections and a few thoughts on leadership for me. So be courageous and be bold. Push the fear away, which isn't always easy for me personally. Please be authentic and honest in what you say and in what you do. Be really self-aware. So it's not what you do, but how you do it, and how that reflects onto others. So it's often called a bit of a leadership shadow. So what is the shadow that you're casting on those around you? You need to be really aware of that. Build really meaningful relationships based on true communication, trust, and respect. Seek out experiences and grasp those opportunities. A really important one to me is to be empathetic and to just be kind to others. I think people really respect people being kind to them, and actively thank and recognise those that help you along the way. So certainly thanked Mari earlier to help me out with this presentation. So it's really important that we thank and recognise those that help us, and look after your health and well-being, which goes is really so important. And sometimes I do wish that I follow my own advice. So this presentation was called A Fish Out of Water, not just because I've read this particular book to my kids thousands of times, but because in some ways it really does reflect my journey. So I was a landlubber, really landing a job at fisheries, which was far from my roots and from my experience. I was a female in the room of a sea of males. Even going to Darwin, I was a southerner in the top end. So if you've ever lived in Darwin or worked in Darwin, a lot of long-timers in the territory don't like southerners. What would a southerner know? Well, I was a southerner going to the territory telling the locals how to do it. So I think that was a bit of a fish out of water. And finally now, being responsible for a portfolio which really has a strong emphasis on agriculture and the land. So it really struck me when I was preparing this that I've pretty much done a full circle. And those early days on the farm in Caliburn and growing up around paddocks and horses actually doesn't seem that far away now. And finally, just thought I'd reflect on what's important to me. So firstly, my family. So my husband, Alan, who some of you know, my two boys, Tyler and Anderson. Really blessed to be supported by Alan, who's been a stay-at-home dad for over 20 years. And I always respect and thank him for the commitment he's made and the opportunity that he's given me. I've put that photo there of being awarded the Public Service Medal, not so much because of me, but because a commitment to public service is important to me, and it really reflects the commitment and passion of many others who I've worked with over the years. And there really is no higher calling than public service, so that still is really important to me. Helping and mentoring others. So this particular photo is of Paul and Jess. They were receiving their certificates at the National Seafood Industry Leadership Program in 2019. And I'm pleased that I may have played a small part in their journeys and hopefully a part in the journey of others. And helping others continues to be really important to me, even as I head towards the back end of my particular career. And there's a photo of my Aussie Shepherd, Shelby, because she brings us so much pleasure each and every day. So with that, I'll say thank you, Kirsten, and I'll try to stop sharing as well.
Thank you, Heather. What an astonishing career that you've had. And I'm really taken with how you have been outside of your comfort zone for so much of that time. Yeah, as I'm sure like quite a few people who are listening today have tried to be out of their comfort zone and know what a challenge that is. But
very difficult.
Yeah, but I guess once you do it as many like you do it lots of times, you kind of go, well, I'm going to survive this, and I'm going to be able to succeed. So I think, yeah, just amazing. What I'm going to do now is we've got about 12, 13 minutes, but depending on the number of questions, if people would like to ask Heather a question, can you raise your hand in the reactions section of the Zoom, and then we can get Heather to answer any of those questions. Or you can put them in the chat. I'll give you a couple of secs to think of a question. I can start. Oh, no, good. Sam. Sam, would you like to ask a question? Sam, I think I can't hear you.
Just we're waiting for Sam. I see lots of people I know online. I'm sure they've got some questions or comments, maybe.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just gonna have a look at the chat. But we've had quite a few comments.
Right.
I had no idea of the breadth of Heather's experience in the NT. This is fascinating. This was happening at the time. Maybe I'll ask my question just while we wait for Sam. And interrupt me, Sam, if you get yours going, because you're not on mute. Heather, you were saying in that you know, early in your career, you were being asked to take the minutes and organise the tea and the coffee and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I know that still happens now, and it's happened to me. Yeah, like what would you do now? Like, what would be your advice to someone, a woman who gets asked to do something like that, and you don't kind of want to make waves, and you don't want to, you know?
It's a really good question. In fact, I was asked to make tea and coffee at a meeting when I was the most senior departmental person in the room. Quite a few years ago, and I still joke to my colleague who was also there that I still tell him that I make a bloody good cup of coffee and would he like one, and because it was pretty awkward for him. Look, it's a good question. People that know me, I'm pretty straight bat. I'm not particularly precious. I would normally be guided by the situation, and I'd normally try to put a bit of humour around it, or make some sort of a professional, respectful, sort of humorous comment, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And not to be honest, and some people might disagree with me, but not to get too beaten up about it. Like there's sort of bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
I would try to make it a bit lighthearted and have a bit of a crack, respectfully though.
Yeah. Okay, that's good advice. All right, Sam, do you want to have another go? See if we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can. Oh, great. My question was, how did Heather and her husband come to the arrangement of him taking on the family roles and responsibilities?
Don't ask his parents, because they weren't that happy. So Alan comes from a very different background to me. So he comes from a much more stable, white-collar background than me, from Sydney. And I remember when he rang up his mum and dad and said that he was giving up his job. He's a mechanical draftsman, that he was giving up his job and he was going to work from home because Heather was going back to work. Don't think that went down particularly well, because what about his career, etc., etc. But look, it was just a discussion. To be honest, it probably goes back a bit to the kids, or to Tyler. I had a bit of postnatal depression when my first was born. I was really struggling a bit, and getting back to work was a pretty important part of that. And we just made a decision that he would stay at home for a period while I went back to work and sort of dealt with that. And it just went from there. And it has been amazing for us, absolutely incredible. And just, for our family and for us, it was absolutely the best thing. But it probably came out of me needing to get a bit of help, to be honest, and to get back to work. That's a pretty honest answer.
Thank you very much.
But his mum and dad still weren't happy, and I think have never forgiven me.
Yeah, that's really interesting situation. My dad was also a stay-at-home dad. Yeah. Sophie, did you have a question? And just to let you know, we've got a couple of questions in the chat as well that we'll get to too. Yeah.
Hi, yes, I do have a quick question for Heather. Heather, you talk about A Fish Out of Water, the book. How does the book end, and does that parallel how you see your career finishing up?
So nice to see you, Susie, as I call Sophie. So the book is, I haven't read the book for a while. It's about Otto. Some of you might know the book, and about the fish that grows way too big for its little home because it gets fed too much by the boy who owns the fish. I can't remember how it ends, Sophie. Does someone know how it ends? It all ends well, and the story is about pretty much, taking advice and taking advice from people. Does anyone know how Fish Out of Water ends with Otto? We're going to have to go and read it now. I'll have to go and read it, Sophie.
Oh,
but I think it ended well, which is probably how things have ended for me. I mean, I'm really blessed, absolutely blessed.
We've had a oh no, sorry. Go on, Nancy, did you have a question? Nancy? We can't hear you.
Shall I go to Linda Williams' question, Kirsten, while we wait for Nancy?
Yes, we can do that.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's an excellent idea.
Just on chat. So yeah. Hi, Linda. Lovely to hear from you. Linda's I assume it's Linda Williams that I know from the lobster sector. Thanks for your kind comments as well. Yeah, look, it has been challenging. It's a big gig. I don't feel that fisheries has taken a back seat. I still spend a large amount of my time in what I would call the fisheries portfolio. We have a fantastic team in fisheries, as you know, Linda, across research, management and compliance. So I can rest assure you that I spend a lot of time on fisheries. It's still very dear to my heart, but I do need to balance that with a range of other responsibilities responsibilities as well. But I feel like fisheries is still really well placed in the new department. And in fact, there's a lot of synergies and learnings across the fisheries and agriculture space. And some of the ones in agriculture we can also bring into fisheries, like biosecurity and aquatic biosecurity. So I'm pretty comfortable. You know, days are busy and days are full, but it's really important work that we do. Thanks, Linda.
Andrew. Andrew, did you have a question?
Hi. Yeah, I'm just coming off. Sorry, Kirsten. Thank you, Heather. Heather, I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit more in terms of fisheries and where fisheries in Australia sit currently and where you think they'll be in, say, the next 15 to 20 years. I think, yes, there are a lot of positives, but there's also a lot of challenges ahead, particularly as we look to the blue economy, increasing interest in offshore oceans for energy and a whole range of things. So, and I'm also curious about what you think about this current state of leadership within fisheries across Australia and the States and the Commonwealth as well. There's probably a fair bit in that, sorry.
So Andrew, was your question about the future in fisheries and where it's heading?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, it's a really good question, and balancing what I'm going to call day-to-day fisheries management and fisheries stuff with strategic stuff is quite a challenge. So I think so from a sort of administrative point of view and you know, rights-based management is still so important to industry, particularly for the commercial industry. So giving the commercial industry the certainty and the confidence to invest and to innovate through making sure they understand and have the security of those rights is really, really important. And that's sort of the new pathway that we're on with our new Act. The other one is clearly the resource sharing issue. And it's not just about the commercial and the recreational sector. It's also about, you know, the sharing of that resource with, you know, for conservation purposes, for coastal development, for aquaculture, for example. So having, again, much greater clarity and guidelines on, I guess, the public policy settings to deal with those resource sharing issues is really important. And I think at times there's quite a governance failure, probably across government in doing that. You talked about the blue economy. So looking for responding to challenges from climate change, environmental influences is something we're working on across DPID, and that's again where we can build on our broader experience and expertise in agriculture, and being able to consider what the new opportunities are in terms of really growing the industry and doing it on a commercial footing. So that's another challenge. And I think aquaculture is a big part of that story nationally as well, and being able to look at what the future might be, probably in offshore aquaculture, as you've sort of mentioned, and trying to get into areas where we've got new technology and we can grow the industry without having some of the other community sort of issues that the industry faces. So in my view, it really is around securing the rights, sharing the resource, and then being able to look to the next decade and say how we're going to adapt and ensure our industries are resilient to changes in not just the climate and environment, but also in the global marketplace. So things like trade and market access, which includes, you know, things like biosecurity, they're all really important challenges. You had a question about how fisheries is across Australia. Probably pretty hard for me to comment on that. I wouldn't like to comment on the other jurisdictions. What I would say is that I'm a really strong believer that we will go much further together than we will go fragmented. And I think I heard that message at some of the webinars earlier. So this industry, and when I say this industry, I really talk the collective, whether it be government and industry together, and the sectors really need to be very strategic. They really do need to be working together rather than being fragmented and working alone, because you know, we're going to see commercial fishermen potentially having to exit the industry food viability, and again, that resource sharing pressure. So we need to think about how we can best structure and I guess set up these industries for the long-term future. So I think fisheries is in good hands, but we all do need to be working together, and we do need to be joined up and much less fragmented than we are now, and probably much less, in some respects, we need to get out of the weeds and really focus on some of the big strategic items. Hopefully that's helpful, Andrew.
Yeah, no, that's great, Heather. I think, can I just pick up one thing, Kirsten? Hopefully I can have another bite at the cherry.
Yeah. If everyone's happy to stay on, we can. Heather, you happy to keep going for a few more minutes? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
I think you touched on it there, is that how do we as a collective industry and governments influence the discussion at that political level? Because I don't think at the moment there's much of an appetite to tackle those strategic issues. It's too hard. And I think I don't see any, there's not a lot of great structures for us as a collective to advance those issues either. I know we have seafood directions coming up in September in Brisbane, and I don't know, it's probably one of the things I'd like to see on the agenda there, is how we can actually progress these sorts of issues as a collective.
The one comment I will make in response, Andrew, is whatever we do, and I've used the word we deliberately, it needs to be enduring. So you can't pop in and out of this stuff. It doesn't work like that. Community expectations are changing every day. Market expectations are changing every day. Financial institutions' expectations are changing. The environment's changing. So whatever we do and whatever systems or institutions are established, we need to have a capacity to be enduring about that and to be long-term. Jumping in and out of things is probably not the answer.
Thank you, Heather. That's great.
Thanks, Andrew. I've got Nancy's question here, which says, thanks for sharing your story, Heather. I noticed the rec fishing permits were introduced in NT in 2007. Are you surprised the same sort of permit hasn't happened across other states, for example, Queensland?
So my understanding in terms of the actual Blue Mud Bay decision is the only state that particular judgment related to was the Northern Territory, because of the nature of the land rights grants. I'm not a lawyer, so I may be wrong there, but that's my understanding. So the actual need for a permission to enter Aboriginal land, which was by way of a permit or licence, I think was fairly unique to the Territory. I may be wrong there. I don't know about Queensland. It certainly wasn't the case in WA. The other question is more of a really a political question. So in Western Australia, we do have a range of licensing requirements for recreational fishers, as does New South Wales, for example. I don't quite know what the Queensland policy is, but it is a hotly debated topic. And I'll just make a comment that in Western Australia, it's really important to understand that licensing isn't just about revenue. It's also about being able to get what we call a licensing frame. So you can actually do some research and some data collection around what's happening in the recreational fishing sector. So it actually does give you that basis for your research and for your evidence, which is so important in fisheries management. But I don't know about the situation in Queensland per se. We've had licensing for a fair while in Western Australia, but we don't have a general angling licence. And the licence in the Territory, is a permit to access land.
Okay, great.
Like someone entering your backyard. In essence, it's a permission to enter your backyard to do something.
We've got a question from Alison.
I see a few people have read a fish out of water. There's a few answers to Sophie's question there, Kirsten.
I'm not unmuted. I know, I should read some of these out.
So the fish seller goes into the local pool and magically reduces the fish to its normal size. And a crane pulls the fish out of the swimming pool. I remember that bit now as well. Thanks, Cal.
I definitely think I'm going to have to get that book. Alison, are you there? People seem to be having problems with their Alison, did you want to put your question in the chat maybe?
Thanks, Sue Ellen, for your lovely comment about Kellyburn. It is a marvellous town. It's very nice to hear that.
There's been a lot of comments that have been great, actually. Got one question, another comment, working for fisheries in another state, still no support for compliance officers to work flexibly or remotely like the rest of the organisation. If managed well, it is achievable and no effectiveness lost. Losing female employees as fast as they recruit them.
Yep, so that's something we're working on here actually, Kirsten, around those flexible working arrangements, and also how we can, that's what fisheries officers, wasn't it? I think it was, how we can, in fact, we're doing some work on how we can really adjust our recruitment and selection process to generate a bigger pool, a more diverse pool, not just females, but also Aboriginal people, but also those from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Yeah, which is something that we need to do as well. So we've got a piece of work we're doing on that here in Western Australia to try and get a more diverse group.
Yeah, really I think diversity overall is really important. I think for the whole industry. I know we talk about women at WISER, but really the same rules kind of apply. We've got Alison's question. Heather, do you see women coming through the employment process?
So what was the question?
It says, does Heather see women coming through in the employment process? Like I'm wondering if you mean into leadership positions.
Yeah, I do, and I think I was going to get you some numbers, but as those of you online who know, our we're redoing our HR system at the moment to get our 3 systems into one, so it's actually a bit of a blackout. So I couldn't pull any data, which I thought about doing last week. But I do see people coming through, and I certainly see women coming through all aspects of where I work, and particularly in fisheries, and we've got some fantastic fisheries managers, which is what I see more than other areas coming through. I still don't think, we've definitely not got enough women coming through the fisheries officers and the compliance ranks at all. And I think we've got some great females in our research area, but I think we could probably do a bit more there as well. What we really don't have is senior executive service women in those roles. So it is hard to take that next step. Structurally, it's hard. That's probably the main thing. So I don't see that, and we need to do better there.
What do you mean by structurally hard?
Oh, just the way that our public sector is structured. So we go, once you hit a certain level, so I think it's level 8 in my language, you then hit into the senior executive service, and there's limitations there's caps on how many of those you can have. So it means you can't structure your organisation as flexibly as you might like. Having said that, there are senior roles, and we do need to make sure that we can get, again, diverse applications for those roles. And I still have a really strong view that women bring something very different to the table, particularly in a regulatory environment, which is a lot of conflict. And I think they get better outcomes sooner, if that makes sense. I think the sooner bit's really important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So are there any other questions from anyone? Otherwise, I think we might start to wrap it up. If there's any last minute hands. You're very inspiring, Heather. That's the vibe of the comment.
I don't feel like it, but thank you, Kirsten.
Yes, I've found it very inspiring as well. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll be putting a link to this webinar so that people who missed out can have a listen, because I think it's kind of like a rare insight. These sorts of stories of journeys of women in the industry, I think it's just absolutely fascinating for everybody. So thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Just before we go, we've got Jo Marshall here, and